Good evening, class. My name is Jeffrey Hall, and I did my research project on British involvement in the 30 Years' War. Now, everything in the context of the 17th century is generally regarded as being a period full of change. And when you think about this war that started as a very small revolt in early 1618 and ultimately became this all-consuming conflagration that affected all of Europe, you might wonder why exactly it is that people from Britain, from an island that generally was kind of isolated from the rest of those events, why would they get involved? And that was my primary research question. And really what it comes down to is, just like everywhere else in Europe, as there was a transition away from the feudal system, new governmental systems had to emerge, and the relationship between the state and its people and the state and the church started to transform. And in that transformation, there was a bit of a struggle for people to try to identify where exactly each portion of those aspects of one's life belonged. When it came to the British getting involved in the 30 Years' War, there was definitely a religious component to it, but it was on the bottom level of the people who participated in the fighting. Kind of in the middle rung of the people that were involved, that left from Scotland predominantly, and also some from England that went over to go fight. There was two classes of mercenary. There was the untrained but reasonably paid soldier, and then there was the members of the lower nobility who were kind of the condottieri of the expeditions. And those members of the warrior caste, if you will, were the ones who fought predominantly for money. Most of the actual combatants came from Scotland simply because the economic situation in Scotland was worse than it was in England. And as a result, it was much easier to recruit from Scotland than it was in England. Even though both shared the same monarch, because of the way the war started, King James initially wasn't sure he wanted to get involved and actually sided against his son-in-law, who was Frederick V, the King of Bohemia, because he wanted to try to maintain the idea that monarchs should be in place. It's kind of a dangerous thing when you're a monarch to support the overthrow of other monarchs. So he wanted to see the Palatinate follow the original coronation of Ferdinand II until the situation got grave for the Protestants. And that kind of brings us to the position of the monarchs. So before the 30 Years' War, there was a robust trading community that went across the Baltic. And James and ultimately Charles I tried to maintain relations as best they could with all the Nordic countries. As Sweden became involved in the 30 Years' War, that was when the largest call for Scottish mercenaries came up. But at that point, the word about how dangerous the war had gotten and the level of destruction had kind of cooled the willingness of people from even Scotland to go over and fight the war. So it's an interesting change. I mean, 30 years is a long time, and a lot can change in 30 years, but it is amazing just how much the perspectives of the people who wanted to go fight changed. So it's a really interesting feature. I don't really like to consider the 17th century, as others do, as maybe this fatalistic perspective that change was bound to happen, because human agency and human actors are required to make difficult decisions under duress. The predomination of the research that went into this project was definitely through reading. I ended up with about 9 primary sources. The most useful for understanding why people went to go fight were definitely the letters between Kings James and Charles when James passed away, and then the other leaders across both the Nordic countries and in the Holy Roman Empire. That really kind of illuminated what the political perspectives were. And then I had 2 or 3 perspectives from Scottish soldiers who had picked up and left and gone and acted as mercenaries. And, you know, for them, they talked about the experience more than they talked about their reasoning, because they weren't trying to justify anything to anybody. They were already kind of being chastised by society for being sellswords. So anyway, it's a very interesting subject that now is getting more traction because there's people in the world who are actually interested in the perspective of the islanders when they went to go fight the 30 Years' War. Predominantly Steve Murdoch, who teaches in Scotland, was very instrumental in kind of putting this project together. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I thank you very much, and have a great evening.